A black mother boards a cross-country flight with nothing more than her baby in her arms and one diaper bag tucked beneath her seat. Within minutes, a flight attendant demands she check it. Not because of weight, not because of space, but because something about her felt off. What happens next silences the entire plane. Why did a calm, rule-following mother become the target of scrutiny? What made a first-class passenger rise to his feet and challenge the flight crew in front of 200 strangers? And how did one quiet voice spark a storm that would shake the airline's top leadership and bring national attention to a story far too common? This is more than a flight. It's a mirror, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. You'll want to stay until the end of this story. So go ahead, like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because what you're about to hear is true, raw, and unforgettable. Now, let's board the flight together. The baby's cries came in short, gasping bursts, slicing through the otherwise silent cabin. Tiny hiccups of distress, sharp and primal, echoing off the curved walls of the aircraft. Seat 21C had become a focal point of tension. Sloane Barrett sat frozen, one arm cradling her squirming 6-month-old daughter Nova, the other gripping the fraying strap of her gray diaper bag, which now rested precariously on her lap. The bag wasn't fancy. It wasn't designer. It was practical, functional, and packed with every item a new mother might need to survive a cross-country flight with an infant: formula, medications, teething gel, a spare onesie, baby wipes, a tiny stuffed elephant named Poe. And yet, in this moment, it had become the subject of scrutiny, of scorn, of a tone sharp enough to slice through her remaining composure. "Ma'am, that bag is clearly oversized," said the flight attendant standing in the aisle, voice elevated and unwavering. "It needs to be gate-checked. Now." Her name tag read Dana. Her voice carried all the finality of someone used to being obeyed. Sloane's throat felt dry. Her mouth opened to speak, to explain again, but nothing came out. Her heart was pounding so loud it drowned out everything but her daughter's sobs and the growing discomfort of dozens of watching eyes. People were pretending not to look, but they were listening, recording, even. A flicker of movement caught her attention. 5 rows ahead, a phone slowly rose into the air, the lens pointed straight at her. Her stomach turned. "I need this bag," Sloane said, finally finding her voice. It was thinner than she wanted, more brittle. "Please, her medication is in here. Her formula. Everything. I measured it. I checked your policy before. You should have thought about that before boarding with an oversized item." Dana interrupted curtly. Her voice was loud enough now for the entire cabin to hear. "Rules are rules." Passengers shifted in their seats. One woman near the front glanced back over her shoulder with narrowed eyes. Another man coughed, uncomfortably loud, and looked back down at his magazine. Sloane blinked against the burn forming behind her eyes. The tears were close, but she wasn't going to let them fall. Not here, not in front of these strangers, not in front of her daughter. From across the aisle, a white mother with twins sat undisturbed, her much larger canvas tote bag stretched under the seat in front of her, half unzipped, toys spilling out. Another woman, 2 rows behind, had a carry-on backpack nearly bursting at the seams. No one said a word to them. No one told them their bags were too big. Why me? Sloane asked herself, not for the first time in her life. But even as the question floated through her mind, the answer rang clear and unwelcome. Because I'm a black woman. The silence stretched on. Dana stood with her arms crossed, posture rigid, eyes cold. "I'm not trying to break the rules," Sloane said, her voice breaking despite herself. "I'm trying to fly with my baby, that's all," Nova wailed louder, tiny fists curling against her mother's chest. Dana sighed, not with compassion, but with irritation. "Either the bag is checked, or you can remove the essentials and hold them in your lap." "I can't carry it all in my lap," Sloane whispered. The bag began to slide from her knees. She gripped it tighter, and then a voice, low and calm, cut through the tension like a breeze before a storm. "Excuse me." The cabin shifted again as a tall figure rose from the first-class section. His motion unhurried but deliberate. His salt and pepper hair was closely cropped, and his posture spoke of decades spent standing straight even when the world tried to bend him. Dr. Preston Chase, though most of the passengers didn't know his name yet, stepped into the aisle like he had done countless times in surgical theaters controlled, steady, aware that every eye was on him. He didn't speak again right away. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored jacket, took a breath, then he walked. Each step echoed just enough to pull attention away from the phone cameras, away from the passive glances, back to the human moment unfolding. Dana turned. Her body stiffened as she recognized him not by name, but by bearing. First-class passenger, clean, respected, the kind who usually complained about their steak being too dry or their wine not being the right temperature. He stopped beside Sloane's seat, his gaze traveling first to her tear-streaked face, then to the small child still crying against her chest, then, finally, to the diaper bag in question. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, voice even, not loud, not aggressive, but with the unmistakable authority of someone used to being listened to. "We're enforcing carry-on regulations," Dana answered briskly. "This bag exceeds size restrictions and must be checked. Dr. Chase looked down at the bag. His eyes scanned it with the same precision he'd used to read thousands of MRIs. He didn't rush. "May I?" he asked Sloane. She hesitated, then nodded. He lifted the bag gently, placed it on the empty middle seat beside her, and measured it visually against the seat's width. Then he slid it into the space under the seat ahead. It fit not perfectly, but clearly no worse than any other personal item on the plane. He turned back to Dana. "Seems compliant to me," he said. Dana's lips thinned. She can't keep a bag that large at her feet during the flight. He raised an eyebrow. "I can count at least 3 other passengers within view with equally sized bags under their seats, none of whom have been asked to check theirs. Would you like me to point them out?" Dana faltered. She glanced around the cabin and noticed what she should have seen long ago, eyes watching, judgment forming, and more than one camera still rolling. Preston Chase's voice remained quiet as he added, "Perhaps we should reconsider whether this is really about the size of the bag." The implication was soft, but sharp. Dana's cheeks colored. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then the intercom clicked on. "Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for departure." She turned away. "The bag can stay," she said stiffly, "but ensure it's secured for takeoff." She walked back toward the galley without another word. Dr. Chase looked at Sloane one last time. "Will you and your daughter be all right?" he asked. Sloane, still stunned, nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said, barely above a whisper. "No thanks necessary," he replied. "Just fairness." He returned to his seat. The baby's cries began to fade. The hush in the cabin lingered. Something had shifted. And yet, this was only the beginning. 16 hours earlier, Sloane Barrett sat cross-legged on her living room floor, surrounded by an explosion of items that might have looked like chaos to anyone else. But to her, it was a system for control in a world that rarely offered her any. One pile for diapers, one for onesies, one for emergency medications, another for a baby monitor she knew she wouldn't use on the plane but packed anyway, just in case. Nearby, a smaller stack earplugs, a soft lavender blanket, a copy of Goodnight Moon, and a carefully folded note sealed in an envelope. She glanced over at the carrier where Nova slept with her fingers curled around the corner of a muslin burp cloth. Her tiny chest rose and fell in perfect rhythm, oblivious to the logistics happening around her. Sloane exhaled slowly, quiet, still, the kind of peace that only lasted for brief windows. She reached over and adjusted the edge of the blanket draped over Nova's feet. This would be her first flight alone with the baby, her first flight without Marcus. Sloane had taken exactly one trip with Marcus after Nova was born, a quick weekend visit to his mother in Asheville when Nova was just 2 months old. Marcus had handled check-in. Marcus had taken the window seat and held Nova during turbulence, whispering calm and nonsense in her ear. He was the one who made jokes when the TSA officer asked too many questions about the baby formula, the one who smoothed over everything. Now it was just her. She picked up the envelope from the floor and tucked it into an inside pocket of the diaper bag. The note wasn't for her. It was for any stranger seated beside her, a small offering of goodwill. It read, in carefully printed handwriting, "Hi, I'm Nova. I'm 6 months old and I'll be flying with my mommy today. I might cry a little or need a diaper change, but my mom packed everything she could think of to make this flight easy. Thank you for your patience." Next to it, she had stapled 2 earplugs and included a piece of candy. She didn't know if the gesture would matter, but it mattered to her. It was her way of saying, "I'm trying." The soft chime of her phone buzzed from the counter. A message from her mother-in-law, Valerie Moore. "Safe travels tomorrow. Let me know what gate you're at. And remember, Nova only needs you. That's always enough." Sloane smiled. Valerie had become something of a second spine after Marcus passed. They weren't always close, not at first, but grief, when respected properly, could be a bridge instead of a canyon. She stood up and began placing items into the diaper bag, her hands working automatically, but her mind elsewhere. What if the baby has a blowout? What if the person next to me complains about her crying? What if the crew tells me I brought too much? What if I forget something important? She tried to shrug the thoughts away. That's why she had the checklist, the spreadsheet, the extra formula packets. She wasn't just preparing for the flight. She was armoring herself. There was something no one really explained to black mothers, not in parenting classes, not in books, not even in the online support groups filled with curated empathy. They never said how tired you'd feel before anything even went wrong, how exhausting it was to pre-defend your right to exist in a public space with a crying baby, to anticipate judgment and be ready with polite smiles, head nods, and preemptive apologies. Sloane had lived her life making herself small to avoid confrontation. Growing up, she'd learned the value of appeasement. Her mother once told her, "Don't give them a reason to see you as a problem." Now, motherhood had forced her to take up space. She couldn't shrink with a baby on her hip and a stroller in her hand. She couldn't disappear when Nova cried in line at the coffee shop, or when someone sighed dramatically behind her in the grocery aisle. So she learned to show up instead, with poise, with intention, and with her checklist. Sloan triple-checked her boarding pass, Oakland to Asheville with no layover, Jet Pacific Flight 348, row 21C, not ideal, but window seats were hard to get on short notice. She'd opted to pay extra for early boarding just to have time to settle in. That way, she wouldn't have to feel the pressure of impatient passengers lining up behind her while she struggled with overhead bins and baby straps. She laid out her clothes for the morning: comfortable black joggers, a soft slate gray hoodie, and slip-on sneakers. Her hair, coiled into a low bun, was wrapped overnight in a satin scarf. In the morning, she'd just tuck it into a head wrap. Simple, neat, unobtrusive. Next, she zipped the diaper bag slowly, running her fingers over the seams. It bulged slightly at the sides, but she'd checked the airline's personal item policy 3 times. Technically, it passed, barely, but it passed. She paused, feeling a weight she couldn't quite name pressed down across her shoulders. Was she being paranoid? No. She had been through enough to know the difference between overreacting and bracing for impact. The sun had set 2 hours ago, and outside the living room window, the streets were still, bathed in a dull orange hue from the streetlights. Sloan turned off the last lamp, scooped up Nova, and carried her to the crib. As she lowered her daughter onto the mattress, Nova stirred, murmured something that sounded like "bah," and fell still again. Sloan sat beside the crib for a long time, watching her baby breathe. She remembered something Marcus once told her on the last night they had spent together before his unexpected collapse. "You were born to raise a girl like her. You've got a spine of iron, Sloan, but you never swing it around. You just hold steady, hold steady." The words stuck with her now. She would hold steady tomorrow, no matter what. Back in the bedroom, she slipped under the sheets and stared at the ceiling fan turning above her. She imagined the hum of the plane's engine, the rustle of the safety demonstration. The moment when the wheels lifted and the cabin tilted, she imagined the stranger next to her. Would they be kind? Would they sigh and roll their eyes? Would they look at her and Nova and see a problem or a person? Eventually, sleep came. Fragile, but deep. The kind of rest that visits the weary, not the rested. When morning arrived, the city outside was still stretching into consciousness, but Sloan was already awake, already packing final items, checking again, wiping Nova's face gently with a warm cloth. She looked at herself in the mirror. No makeup, just a swipe of moisturizer, lip balm, and the clear gaze of a woman ready for whatever the day might ask of her. She whispered, "Let's go, baby girl." And they did, toward the airport, toward a seat in 21C, toward a moment that neither of them could yet imagine. The sky over Boston had been gray when Preston Chase stepped into the back seat of the black sedan that morning. A cold drizzle dancing across the windshield as the driver pulled out from his quiet cul-de-sac in Cambridge. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where everyone mowed their lawn and left porch lights on after dark, the kind of place that made people think the man who lived there had always had it easy. But nothing about Preston's journey had been easy. He sat with his hands folded neatly over the lapels of his navy wool coat, his duffel beside him, silent as the city passed by in blurred streaks of concrete and fog. Even after all these years, all the titles, all the honors, he still preferred travel in light, a habit carried from decades in emergency rooms and operating theaters, where time was measured in seconds and unnecessary wait had consequences. Dr. Preston Chase was a name whispered with reverence in the world of trauma medicine. Chief of Surgery Emeritus at Massachusetts General. Author of 3 landmark papers on vascular repair under battlefield conditions. Mentor to dozens of surgical residents. Recipient of the National Medal of Science. And yet, none of that seemed to matter the moment he passed through airport security. Because before they saw the surgeon, before the titles, before the legacy, they always saw the same thing first. A tall black man in a well-cut coat. Sometimes he'd catch the second glance. Other times it was a stutter in the voice of a TSA agent asking if he'd packed his own bag. Occasionally, the more overt the person behind the desk explaining that pre-boarding was for executive class, only even while holding his ticket marked 2A. Most days, Preston let it pass, the soft racism of bureaucracy, the quiet indignities of air travel. He'd long ago trained his face to smile in ways that didn't invite conversation. But today, something sat uneasily beneath the surface. Maybe it was the speech he'd be given tomorrow at the Medical Ethics Conference in Asheville. Or maybe it was the dream that woke him in the middle of the night. He hadn't dreamed about his father in years. The man had been a bricklayer. Steady hands, proud back, woke before dawn and came home coated in dust. He never complained, never smiled much either. But he believed in 2 things with religious fervor: hard work and silence. Preston had inherited both. It wasn't until decades later, deep into his residency, that Preston began to understand the price of that silence, the cost of letting comments slide, of watching black nurses be ignored while white interns were praised, of never correcting the assumption that he was an orderly instead of the attending. He had once told himself that excellence would be its own rebuttal, that if he was simply good enough, no one could deny his worth. And for a time, it seemed to work. He climbed the ranks, got the degrees, earned the trust of patients and peers alike. But excellence did not make him immune. It only made the insults quieter, more polished, hidden behind policy and phrasing. Now, at 62, with silver crowning his temples and decades behind his name, he still felt that familiar chill in certain rooms. The car pulled up to the airport curb. The driver stepped out and opened the door. "Have a good flight, Dr. Chase," he said, tipping his head respectfully. "Thank you." "Marcus," Preston replied, offering a firm nod in return. Inside the terminal, the noise of morning travel rose around him in waves. Luggage wheels clacked against tile. A child cried somewhere near the ticketing counters. Overhead, the voice of a gate agent called for final boarding of a flight to Chicago. He moved through it all like water around stone. Fluid, silent, observing more than he said. At the security checkpoint, a young white agent barely glanced at his ID before waving him through. "Right this way, sir." Pre-check had its perks, but Preston never forgot how different the process looked when he traveled with his younger colleagues who wore braids or spoke with accents. He placed his bag into the bin, slipped off his shoes, and passed through the scanner. No issues. At the gate, he approached the check-in counter and handed over his boarding pass. The woman smiled quickly. "Good morning, Mr. Chase. You're in first class, seat 2A. Would you like assistance boarding?" Preston smiled politely. "No, thank you. I'll be fine." She nodded and returned to her screen. He took a seat nearby and pulled out his phone, scrolling past headlines about a city council dispute and a celebrity's divorce. Eventually, he opened the draft of the speech he'd be given tomorrow. It was titled, "What We Don't See." Implicit bias in patient care. The irony, of course, was that no matter how many panels he spoke on, or how many white coats nodded solemnly during Q&As, change came slowly, too slowly. He adjusted his glasses and read aloud under his breath. When you walk into a room and see a person lying unconscious on a table, you should see a human first. But many of us see age, color, weight, or gender before we see vulnerability, before we see pain, and by the time we've looked past the surface, we may already be too late. He paused, staring at the words. Something about them felt insufficient, detached, too academic. What would he say if he weren't trying to sound professional? He'd say, "We miss what matters when we assume we already know someone." He saved the note and closed the file. Pre-boarding was announced. He stood, stretching his back slightly, as he walked toward the jet bridge. He passed by a woman seated near the rear gate with a baby strapped to her chest and a heavy diaper bag at her feet. Her face looked tired but composed. She didn't notice him, but he noticed her. The way she gently rocked the baby side to side, the way she clutched the bag like it held the last scraps of her sanity, the way she sat apart from everyone, like she knew how often the world failed to make space for her. He offered her a small, almost imperceptible nod as he walked past. She didn't see it, but he meant it anyway. Once on board, he stowed his bag, fastened his seatbelt, and leaned his head back. The cabin was still half empty. The hum of the plane's systems created a kind of white noise he found oddly comforting. He thought of his father again. And then he thought of the woman at the gate. He didn't know her name, but he had a feeling he would. Soon. Dana Koenig adjusted the knot on her navy blue scarf for the third time, the ends refusing to fall evenly over her blouse. She sighed and gave up. It wasn't the scarf, it was her hands. They wouldn't stop trembling. She stood alone in the crew break room at Terminal B, sipping burnt coffee from a paper cup and pretending the bitter taste didn't bother her. Her eyes drifted to the clock. 6:03 a.m. Her shift briefing would start in 12 minutes, then pre-boarding, then a full flight to Asheville, then silence. That was the part she longed for, the silence after takeoff, the moment when all the passengers were strapped in, their expectations reset, their demands softened by altitude. In the air, things made sense. Policies mattered. Rules could be enforced cleanly. It was the ground that felt messy. She took another sip of coffee and stared at her reflection in the microwave door. She looked older this week, more than usual. She blamed the night before. It had started with a text. Her ex-husband, Greg, asking if she'd seen the TikTok their son had posted. No. Should I be worried, she'd replied. 5 minutes later, the video came through. Their 16-year-old, Ethan, in his bedroom, monologuing into the front camera, a rant about race, privilege, and police stops, his voice full of fire and hurt. Dana hadn't even known he was feeling that way. The caption read, "White silence is violence. That includes parents too." She didn't sleep well after that, not because she disagreed, not entirely, but because she didn't know how to help him. She'd always tried to be fair, to teach respect, to keep politics out of the house. Now she wasn't so sure she'd done the right thing. Ethan had grown up seeing the world one way. Then, last year, one of his best friends got stopped in their neighborhood for fitting a description, and everything shifted. The boy's parents pulled him out of school 3 months later and moved to another district. Dana had offered to talk to the police chief about it. Ethan said that was the problem. Now. She stood in a break room thinking about a video her own son had made, wondering if it had gone viral, wondering if other crew members had seen it. What would they say if they knew her son was calling her complicit? What did that word even mean to someone like her? She pulled her badge from her pocket and clipped it to her blazer. Dana Koenig, senior flight attendant, Jet Pacific Air, 17 years of service. She had trained hundreds of new hires, knew every FAA regulation by heart, had walked out of emergency landings with panicked passengers clinging to her arm. She had once held a dying man's hand at 30,000 feet until the paramedics could take over on the ground. She wasn't the villain. She was just tired. Dana entered the briefing room and nodded to the other crew members. A couple of familiar faces, a couple of new ones. She greeted them all the same, politely, efficiently. With just enough warmth to get through the shift, the captain read the manifest. 98 passengers, full flight, 2 infants, one traveling with a woman seated in 21C, another in row 34B. Dana jotted it down in her notepad. Then the captain mentioned one passenger in particular. First class, seat 2A, Dr. Preston Chase, listed as a VIP. There's a note in the system to offer him a complimentary wine of his choosing. He's on Jet Pacific's speaker series tomorrow in Asheville. Dana nodded. She didn't recognize the name. VIPs were usually corporate types, or tech moguls. Once in a while, a retired senator or best-selling author. They mostly wanted quiet, hot coffee, and cold towels. She was fine with that. The briefing ended and Dana led the crew toward the jet bridge. As they entered the aircraft, the smell of disinfectant and recycled air greeted her like an old friend. She slipped into autopilot, cabin lights on, equipment checked, overhead bins double-checked. 10 minutes later, boarding began. The first few passengers trickled in older couples, solo business travelers, the usual blend. Dana greeted each with a neutral smile, her voice professional and even. Then came a tall black man in a tailored coat, boarding pass in hand. His presence quieted the air around him. "Good morning," she said, stepping slightly to the side. He nodded once and proceeded to 2A. Something about him felt familiar. Maybe the way he moved, unhurried, certain, like someone used to being watched. She shook the thought off. More passengers streamed in. A woman in a pink tracksuit, chewing gum too loudly. A couple of college students giggling about something on their phones. An elderly man shuffling slowly, gripping his boarding pass like a lifeline. Then she saw her, a black woman, early 30s, wearing a soft gray hoodie and carrying a baby strapped to her chest. A large diaper bag hung from one shoulder, and she pulled a small roller bag behind her. Her eyes were focused, tired but alert. Dana's gaze locked on the diaper bag. She said nothing, just watched as the woman passed and made her way down the aisle to the rear of the plane. The bag looked too large, maybe not drastically, but larger than the standard underseat allowance. Dana made a mental note to check it once boarding finished. She didn't feel malice, not at first, just the weight of order, the responsibility to keep the aisles clear, the exits accessible, the passengers secure. Still, something about the woman's presence unsettled her, not in the way she'd admit aloud, but in the way her mind reflexively noted things, her tone, her confidence. the quiet resistance in the way she held herself. Dana had spent years learning to read people. She didn't like passengers who challenged boundaries. She didn't like passengers who looked like they were bracing for a fight. The baby began to fuss as the mother reached her row. Dana exhaled slowly and turned back to her duties. There were still 20 passengers left to board. One crying baby wasn't worth dwelling on. Yet somehow, she couldn't stop thinking about the video Ethan had posted. The anger in his voice, the disappointment. She had always believed that rules created fairness, that if everyone followed the same policies, fairness would follow, but maybe that wasn't how it really worked. Maybe fairness required something else, something harder. She pushed the thought away. Today she had a flight to manage, a cabin full of lives to keep safe, a set of regulations to uphold, and a bag in 21C that might not fit under the seat. The terminal buzzed with the nervous energy unique to early morning travel. People moved with coffee in one hand and boarding passes in the other, dragging tired suitcases and even more tired children behind them. Overhead announcements echoed off the glass walls, calling out gate changes and final boardings like distant chants. Sloan Barrett stepped into the security line at Oakland International Airport, with Nova pressed against her chest, still asleep in the soft wrap. The warmth of her baby's body kept her calm, even as the line crept forward at a glacial pace. The diaper bag hung off her shoulder, heavier than she remembered packing it. The small roller bag at her feet kept tipping as she tried to nudge it forward. She noticed people watching her. Not all of them, but enough. A businessman in line behind her sighed when Nova stirred and whimpered. A white woman 2 rows ahead turned around and gave her a polite but tight-lipped smile. Sloan smiled back instinctively, the way you do when you're trying to signal I'm not a threat. She adjusted the wrap and glanced at the sign overhead. Carry-on items must fit within the sizer. She had measured, twice. Her diaper bag technically counted as a personal item. Technically. She tried to slow her breathing. There was no issue yet. No one had said anything. She was imagining trouble where none existed. But experience had taught her that it wasn't always about what was said out loud. Sometimes it was about the glance that lingered just long enough, the sigh that wasn't quite subtle, the tone that told you, without saying the words, that you were being tolerated, not welcomed. When it was finally her turn, the TSA agent asked her to remove the baby from the wrap. Sloan complied, gently lifting Nova and whispering reassurances in her ear as she did. Nova whimpered once, then quieted. The agent patted down her arms, her waistband, and the straps of her bag with a practiced detachment. Then, for reasons not explained, they tested her formula with a swab and asked her to open the wipes. It took 6 extra minutes. Sloan tried not to show frustration. She didn't want to be the difficult one. She didn't want to give anyone an excuse to doubt her patience or her parenting. When she finally cleared security, she exhaled like she'd surfaced from underwater. She rocked Nova gently and whispered, almost to herself, "We're okay. We're through, a few gates away." Dr. Preston Chase sipped a double espresso from a porcelain cup in a quiet corner cafe. He had found a seat by the window, his duffel by his feet, and his tablet open with half-finished notes for his conference speech. He didn't look up when the 2 TSA agents moved past the cafe, but he had noticed them earlier. The way they had inspected a black teenage boy's backpack while letting other passengers pass freely. The way the boy had looked down and kept nodding. his shoulders tight. Preston had seen that same posture in his residence when attending surgeons interrupted them, questioned their diagnoses, second-guessed their tone. He knew what it meant to carry dignity under surveillance. He had made a mental note to add a paragraph to his talk. Bias doesn't require intention. It thrives on assumption. He glanced at the time. 1 hour until boarding. Out of habit, he scanned the concourse, the crowd, the pace, the people. He had always believed airports were small windows into society's most honest behaviors. Stressed travelers dropped their masks without realizing it. The kindness or cruelty you gave to strangers in a terminal often revealed who you were when no one needed you to pretend. His eyes caught a figure moving across the hall, a young black woman with a baby wrapped tight to her chest. She was moving slowly, dragging a roller bag, her eyes scanning the gate numbers with a quiet urgency. He didn't know her name yet, but something about her caught his attention. Not just the baby or the bags, the way she carried herself. Upright, present, composed, even in exhaustion. He watched her approach gate 15 and settle into a chair near the window. She rocked the baby gently, then reached into her bag for a small cloth and dabbed at her daughter's cheeks. Preston took another sip of coffee, then looked back down at his speech draft. Across the terminal, Dana Koenig walked quickly through the staff hallway toward her gate. Her polished shoes echoed with each step, the sound sharp and rhythmic. She was already 5 minutes behind schedule, thanks to the line at employee check-in and the fact that the coffee shop near her concourse had run out of oat milk. She carried a stainless steel tumbler filled with coffee she didn't like and a folder of flight documents under one arm. Her mind was already in airplane mode, seating charts, meal preferences, emergency drills, but part of her thoughts kept drifting to Ethan. His video, his voice, the judgment behind his words. She hadn't responded to his last text, not because she didn't care, but because she didn't know what to say. She had spent her life believing that professionalism and fairness were the solution to everything, that if she followed the rules, if she remained composed, if she never let emotion leak through, she'd be respected, protected. Now her own son was accusing her of being part of the problem. And worst of all, part of her feared he was right. As she approached gate 15, she noticed the passengers already gathering, a few familiar business travelers, some young couples, and further down, a woman sitting alone with a baby against her chest. Donna's eyes scanned the seating area without lingering. She didn't notice Preston, sitting just out of view from the boarding gate. She didn't yet recognize Sloane, but paths were already beginning to converge. The gate agent handed her a clipboard with a smile. Dana signed off on the flight readiness, then stepped onto the jet bridge to perform the first inspection. The plane was quiet, empty. The only sounds were the soft hiss of the air conditioning and the occasional beep from cockpit systems. Dana checked the emergency equipment in the galley, adjusted the headrests in first class, and walked the length of the cabin, inspecting seat belts, tray tables, and life vests. As she returned to the front, she caught a glimpse of the passenger manifest still sitting on the counter. Her eyes flicked to seat 21C. Female, infant in arms. No special assistance requested. She made another mental note. Large bag, row 21. Confirm under seat fit. The ritual comforted her. Order, structure, something she could control. Outside, the terminal speakers announced pre-boarding for families traveling with small children. Sloane stood and adjusted Nova's wrap. The baby stirred but didn't cry. Sloane kissed the top of her head and tightened the strap across her chest. Preston heard the announcement and gathered his things. Though he wouldn't board just yet, he preferred to wait until the final call, letting the rush pass. Dana stood by the aircraft door, her expression neutral and polished. Sloane approached the gate with steady steps, roller bag trailing behind. 3 people, 3 stories, 3 directions of pressure. The door of the aircraft stood open. Everything that mattered was about to begin. Sloane stepped into the aircraft, the hum of its systems surrounding her like a mechanical heartbeat. The overhead lights were dimmed to a soft glow, casting a bluish hue over the beige seats. Nova stirred but remained quiet, her cheek pressed against Sloane's chest. She offered a polite smile to the male flight attendant standing at the front, who nodded and gestured down the aisle. Seat 21C, just past the wing. Sloane thanked him softly and began the careful journey down the narrow corridor. Her roller bag bumped along behind her, and the diaper bag tugged at her shoulder, its weight dragging with every step. Each row passed like a countdown. 17A, 17B, 17C. She walked past travelers settling into their seats, some looking up briefly, others too engrossed in phones or earbuds to notice her. A few offered soft smiles when they saw the baby. Others glanced with a mix of curiosity and subtle irritation. She caught a whisper from 2 rows ahead. "Hope she's not right behind us." A man muttered it to his wife, not unkindly, but not kindly either, just loud enough for it to land. Sloane let it roll off. She was used to these comments, wrapped in humor but shaped by bias. What they meant was, "Please don't make noise, please don't take up space." She reached her row, 21A, 21B, 21C. The window seat was already taken by a teenage girl chewing gum and wearing noise-canceling headphones. The middle seat was mercifully empty. Sloane had 21C the aisle. She didn't love it, but with a baby, at least it gave her room to maneuver. She gently maneuvered Nova and the diaper bag into the row. The roller bag went overhead with a slight grunt. The diaper bag, though heavy, she placed carefully at her feet. It bulged, but not excessively. She glanced down to make sure it slid in fully beneath the seat in front of her. It did, just barely. Perfect. Sloane sat back and exhaled. The small victories mattered. 2 rows ahead, Dana Koenig watched from her jump seat, clipboard in hand. She observed the way the woman in 21C placed the bag under her seat. Her eyes narrowed slightly. It looked snug, possibly oversized. She made a quiet note in the margin of the manifest. Large bag, 21C, confirm secure post-boarding. Her mind cataloged it as a standard observation. Nothing personal, just part of ensuring safety. And yet, somewhere in her chest, something tightened. She couldn't explain it. She turned to assist another family boarding with twin toddlers in first class. Preston Chase sat in 2A, sipping water from a glass. He had boarded near the end, just as he always did, avoiding the shuffle and glances that came when people noticed his seat number didn't match their assumptions. He had nodded politely to the crew, stowed his bag, and sat with his back straight and his eyes calm. But he noticed everything. The way the gate agent had double-checked his ID without smiling. The way the flight attendant in the front, Dana, had offered sparkling wine to the passenger in 2B, but hadn't said a word to him yet. Subtle things. He wasn't offended. Not exactly. He'd just grown used to reading the air. Now, as the plane filled, He gazed down the aisle and saw her, the young woman with the baby from the terminal. Her head was turned slightly, adjusting the baby's blanket. She looked calm, tired, but composed. The kind of composure that came from experience, not ease. He watched as a few more passengers passed her row and glanced at the baby. He recognized the tension in their body language, the subconscious pullback, the silent hope to not be seated too close. Then, a man approached seat 21B. He was white, mid-40s, wearing a logo-branded pullover and carrying a laptop bag. He glanced at Sloane, paused, then slid into the middle seat with visible hesitation. He smiled faintly at her, then immediately pulled out headphones. Sloane gave a polite smile in return. She could read it, too. He didn't want to talk, didn't want to interact. He had already decided she was going to be a situation and was preparing for it. She looked down at Nova, who had finally fallen into a deeper sleep. The last passengers boarded. Dana moved through the cabin, checking seat belts and carry-ons. When she reached row 21, her eyes went straight to the bag. She paused. "Ma'am," she said, her tone even but firm, "that diaper bag looks oversized. I need to confirm it fits fully under the seat." Sloane blinked. She had checked already. It did fit, barely, yes, but it wasn't sticking out. "I made sure it was within the size limit," Sloane said calmly. "It fits." Dana crouched slightly and looked. The corner of the bag did protrude by an inch, maybe less. "It's close, but safety regulations require all personal items to be completely under the seat in front of you. No part can be sticking out." Sloane tightened her hold on Nova. "I need everything in that bag," she said. "I have formula, medication, extra clothing, wipes. I can't check it." Dana stood upright again. "You're welcome to remove essential items and carry them with you. The bag itself will need to be gate checked." Sloane felt a knot forming behind her rib cage. "Please," she said, not loudly, but with enough gravity that the man in 21B looked up. "I'm not trying to break rules. I planned for this. I followed the guidelines." Dana kept her professional smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "This isn't personal. Ma'am, it's a matter of policy. I can assist you with removing essentials now." Preston Chase had been listening from 3 rows up. He had heard the shift in the tone, the small humiliation laced in regulation. He leaned forward, eyes focused, waiting. Sloane reached for the bag. Nova stirred. A baby's cry pierced the cabin, sharp and immediate. The woman in 20C flinched. The man in 21B sighed and closed his eyes. Across the aisle, someone turned in their seat to look. "I have everything organized," Sloane said, more desperately now. "It's not like I stuffed it full of junk. Everything in here matters." Dana's voice softened slightly, but her posture remained unchanged. "I understand, but we have to be consistent with all passengers." Sloane's jaw clenched. No one else is being asked to check their bag. Dana opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught. A phone in row 22 lifted slightly into the air, its camera now aimed subtly toward the scene. And then, just as Dana began to speak again, a quiet, steady voice filled the aisle. "Excuse me." Preston stood, every head turned, and everything began to shift. Preston Chase didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone brought a hush to the aisle. Passengers paused their conversations. Even Dana's expression shifted subtly, tightening around the eyes as she turned toward him. "Is there an issue with the passenger in 21C?" Preston asked, his voice low, even. Dana blinked, recalibrating her response mid-thought. She wasn't expecting anyone, let alone a first-class passenger, to step into coach. "I'm addressing a safety concern," she said. "The passenger's bag does not fully fit under the seat." Preston's gaze moved to Sloane, who was holding Nova close. The baby had stopped crying, but her tiny body was tense, lips quivering, eyelids fluttering with discomfort. "I saw her bored," Preston said. "She didn't bring excess luggage. That diaper bag is essential for her child's care. I'm certain there's room beneath the seat." Dana hesitated. The regulation echoed in her head, crisp and non-negotiable. No part of any carry-on item may protrude into the aisle or extend beyond the underseat storage compartment. "I understand your concern," she replied, "but it's not about the number of items. It's about compliance with FAA safety rules. That bag must be either fully stowed or gate-checked." Sloane looked from Dana to Preston. There was something in his expression assurance, solidarity that softened the edge of her exhaustion. For the first time since boarding, she didn't feel like she was defending herself alone. "Doctor," she said softly, "I packed everything according to their guidelines. It's medication, diapers, extra formula. I don't have a second bag." Preston nodded once. "To be clear," he said, directing his words now toward Dana, "you're asking this mother to hand over her only supply of her infant's essentials for a flight that's just under 4 hours." Dana's mouth opened, then closed again. Across the cabin, murmurs stirred. "She's got a baby. For God's sake, that's ridiculous. Seriously." The man in 21B suddenly shifted in his seat. "I can move mine to the overhead," he offered, "if it's a space issue." Dana swallowed. Her professionalism felt frayed, edges splintering. She had followed the rules. She had done her job. Why was this spiraling? Preston stepped one row closer, calm, measured, yet undeniably present. "Sometimes rules should be applied with discretion," he said. "That's what real judgment looks like." He didn't sound angry, but his words held weight. The phone in 22A was still raised. A young woman, early 20s, was now openly recording. Her brows furrowed in silent disapproval. Dana felt the heat rise in her cheeks. "We have protocols," she repeated, softer now. "I'll make a note of the exception. It's just, when passengers see inconsistency, they assume favoritism." Preston tilted his head slightly, or they assume compassion. Silence lingered like a held breath. Sloane looked down at Nova. The baby had fallen back into a light sleep, one hand curled into the neckline of her mother's hoodie. She turned to Dana. "I don't want to be a problem," she said. "I just want to keep my baby safe." Dana looked at her. Truly looked at her for the first time since the exchange began. Not just a passenger, not a policy deviation, but a woman holding her child together, held together herself by nothing more than determination and grace. Dana's mind flicked again to Ethan. His video, his voice cracking as he said, "You think following rules makes you good, but sometimes rules are the excuse." She took a slow breath, then nodded. "Your bag can stay, ma'am," Dana said quietly, "if you're able to keep it completely under the seat once we're in the air." Sloane nodded, a whisper of gratitude in her voice. "Thank you." The tension in the cabin eased almost immediately. The passengers who had been watching resumed adjusting seat belts or unwrapping snacks, but the energy had shifted. Everyone had felt it. Dana stepped back, moving toward the front of the plane without another word. Her shoulders squared, her steps brisk. She made her way into the galley and stood there, hands gripping the metal counter, heart racing. She had followed procedure, but something about the moment felt wrong. She wasn't sure if she had been enforcing policy or proving something. She wasn't even sure when the line had blurred. Her eyes welled up before she could stop them. She blinked hard. Preston had returned to his seat without fanfare. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and folded his hands in his lap. The woman in 21C Sloane sat in silence, rocking gently. The corners of her eyes glistened, but she held her expression firm. Passengers nearby gave her small nods, words of encouragement whispered under their breath. "Good for you. Don't let them push you around." Sloane didn't reply. She simply smiled faintly and pressed her lips to Nova's forehead, row by row. The aircraft quieted again, but the ripple lingered. In 22A, the young woman lowered her phone. She tapped her screen, adding a caption. "Black mom told to check her baby's only bag. Then this happened." Preston Chase opened his tablet again. He wasn't reading. He was remembering a different flight, a younger version of himself, seated next to a white woman who had quietly asked the flight attendant to move her because she felt uncomfortable. He hadn't said a word then. He had swallowed it. That day taught him silence didn't protect you. It simply delayed the consequence. But today, he had spoken. And sometimes, one voice was enough to interrupt injustice before it hardened into harm. Back in the galley, Dana took a deep breath and opened the crew intercom, her voice steady as it echoed into the cabin. "Flight attendants, prepare doors for departure and cross-check." Sloane tightened the straps of the wrap across her chest, adjusting Nova one final time, and as the plane pulled away from the gate, she felt something shift inside her too. It wasn't just relief. It was the knowledge that someone had stood beside her, that today she hadn't had to carry the entire weight alone. 35 minutes into the flight, somewhere over the foothills of Colorado. The atmosphere aboard Jet Pacific Flight 682 settled into a quiet rhythm. Engines hummed, seatbelt signs dimmed, and flight attendants moved through the aisles offering water and small bags of trail mix. Sloane Barrett leaned slightly into the curve of the window. Nova nestled against her chest, finally asleep in a way that felt deep and full. The baby's hand twitched once, then relaxed. Sloane closed her eyes just long enough to absorb the peace. For the first time in days, she wasn't preparing for the next conflict, not chasing a nap, a bottle, a moment to herself, not bracing for another moment when she would need to explain her presence in a space that wasn't built with her in mind. She simply breathed. From the row behind her, she heard the soft ping of an airdrop notification. Someone 2 rows back was sending a video, not to her, but to the man beside her. The passenger in 21B opened his phone, glanced at the thumbnail, and paused. It was unmistakably a clip of the confrontation. Sloane's heart skipped. Her chest tightened. The man looked at her, then looked down. He didn't say anything, but the way he shifted in his seat said enough. He had been there, had offered to move his bag, had seen the tension unfold. Now it was looping on phones, quietly spreading from one device to another, from passenger to passenger. In 17D, a college-aged woman whispered to her boyfriend, "This went up 20 minutes ago, already at 82,000 views. Seriously, he whispered back. Look at the caption. Flight attendant tries to force black mom to check baby's only bag. Doctor in first class steps in. The boyfriend raised his eyebrows. Damn. Up front, in seat 2A. Preston Chase noticed the shift. Heads turning toward phones, brows furrowing, lips whispering. He didn't need to see the video. He knew the power of a moment captured in motion. He didn't speak, just watched. He was thinking of all the times he'd witnessed injustice unfold quietly, subtly, without any proof but memory, and how different it felt when a camera was there to hold someone accountable. It made things louder, sharper, but it didn't always make things right. In the galley, Dana Koenig sipped lukewarm coffee from her steel tumbler, staring at nothing in particular. She had just finished distributing drinks to rows 10 through 25, and now she stood near the beverage cart, silently bracing herself for the second half of the flight. Her hands felt cold even though the cabin was warm. One of the junior attendants approached with a half smile, unsure. "Hey, Dana," she said quietly. "Someone up in economy said there's a video going around from earlier involving you. I think." Dana blinked. "What kind of video?" The attendant shrugged gently, trying to soften the blow. "Passenger filmed the bag thing with the mom and the baby. Looks like it's getting some traction online." Dana's stomach flipped. She nodded slowly and turned away, her back now to the cabin. The hum of the coffee maker, the subtle shifts of altitude, even the low murmur of conversation from first class, all of it faded. She stared down at her hands. Her thoughts spiraled. She had done her job, had enforced policy, had used the same tone she used for everyone, firm, controlled, professional. So why did it feel like she was the one unraveling she had never intended to single anyone out? Or had she? Dana took a breath and pulled out her phone discreetly. The Wi-Fi was spotty, but notifications had already started trickling in. 2 texts from colleagues, one from her supervisor, and one from Greg. "You okay? Ethan saw the video. He's pretty upset." Dana's chest ached. She didn't reply. She couldn't, because she knew the video would only show part of the truth, but that didn't mean it was false. It would show the expression on her face, her posture, her insistence on the rule, and it would show a black mother, dignified and steady, trying to protect her baby. It would show a black man in the first class standing up and asking a question she hadn't been ready to answer. Is this about policy or about power? Dana pressed the phone to her chest and leaned back against the wall of the galley. The metal felt cold through her uniform. In seat 21C, Sloane shifted slightly. Nova had fallen into a deeper sleep, her body warm and soft against her mother's chest. Sloane adjusted the strap of the wrap, careful not to wake her. She noticed the phones, the glances. It didn't surprise her. In a way, it didn't bother her either. Not yet, because for the first time, something had unfolded publicly, and the truth hadn't been twisted to make her look unreasonable, dramatic, angry. She had kept her voice calm. She had stood her ground, and someone had stood beside her. She knew this wouldn't erase the years of being questioned, dismissed, over-explained, but maybe, just maybe, it would matter. She looked across the aisle and saw the young woman from 22A, the one who had filmed it. The girl gave her a small nod, hesitant but sincere. Sloane returned it. Meanwhile, in 2A, Preston Chase pulled out a book from his bag, an old paperback by James Baldwin. Not because he needed to read, but because he needed to anchor himself. He flipped through the familiar pages until he found the line he remembered. The world is before you, and you need not take it or leave it as it was when you came in. He stared at it, unmoving. Something about the moment reminded him of his first protest in college. He hadn't spoken during the chant. He had just stood in the back, watching, unsure whether his presence counted. Now, all these years later, he still wasn't sure what counted most, the moment you raised your voice, or the moments that followed when you stayed to face what came next. Up in the galley, Dana opened the flight manual for a distraction, pretending to check oxygen protocols. But the words swam on the page. She wasn't worried about her job. Not yet. She was worried about Ethan, and whether he would watch the video and see her as part of the problem he kept begging her to understand. And that thought that heartbreak was more painful than any headline. The cabin lights dimmed as Flight 682 began its smooth arc eastward over the central Rockies. The sky outside turned from a hazy gray to the soft glow of early morning sun rising over snow-dusted peaks. The air was calm, but below the surface, tension rippled quietly through the plane. Sloan adjusted Nova in her wrap, the baby still sleeping peacefully, her tiny fist resting just over Sloan's heart. She reached into the diaper bag with slow, deliberate care, pulling out a small packet of baby wipes. Her fingers brushed a folded burp cloth, then the small journal she always carried, a cloth-covered notebook where she jotted down memories for Nova to read one day. Milestones, moments, things that wouldn't make it to Instagram. She turned to a blank page and began writing. February 9th, 37,000 feet above the ground. Today, you were calm in the chaos. Today, someone stood up for us. She paused. Her pen hovered, and for once, we were believed. She swallowed and kept writing, the hum of the plane and the warmth of Nova grounding her. She didn't know how viral the video had gone. She wasn't checking. She wasn't refreshing feeds, but she could feel it. The energy had shifted. Passengers who once ignored her were now offering smiles, asking quietly if she needed anything, or simply nodding with a strange, silent kind of respect. Not pity, not awkwardness, respect. It felt unfamiliar, and it made her heart ache a little. At the front of the plane, Preston Chase was speaking softly with the flight attendant, not Dana, but the younger one who had brought him his drink earlier. She had recognized him from a talk he gave last year on health disparities in underserved communities. She'd quietly asked if he was okay after the incident. Preston had replied, "I'm fine, thank you," then paused. "But I don't think she is," he added, gesturing subtly toward the back where Dana was pacing the galley. The attendant nodded and offered to check on Dana, but Preston stopped her. "Let her have her space," he said. "Sometimes realizing you were wrong is the worst turbulence of all." In the rear galley, Dana Koenig leaned over the sink, pretending to sort napkins. Her hands were still trembling. Her mind was racing. The Wi-Fi was just strong enough for text and email to trickle in. She'd already gotten one from her supervisor asking for a full incident report as soon as possible after landing. No tone, no blame, just protocol. But protocol now felt like the enemy. There was a time she believed it was the thing that kept everything safe and fair. Now she wasn't sure. The junior attendant returned, whispering that the passenger in 2A had declined additional service. Dana nodded silently. She couldn't bring herself to walk past him again just yet. The image of him standing up in the aisle, his calm voice cutting through the air like truth on a tightrope, It replayed in her mind like a courtroom clip. She checked her phone again. New notification. Twitter. A quote tweet from someone with a blue check mark. This is why black women are tired, why we keep receipts, why we travel prepared for confrontation. Below it, the video, the confrontation, her own face frozen mid-sentence. She closed the phone and slid it into her blazer pocket. 3 rows from the front, a young woman glanced down at her phone and nudged her partner. "Hey, this just hit 1.6 million views." He blinked. "What?" "It's everywhere." HuffPost reposted it. Someone tagged Jet Pacific in the comments. Their PR team's gonna be scrambling. She looked over at Sloane. She has no idea. Does she, Sloane? At that moment, was shifting Nova slightly to the left to nurse discreetly. Her body curled naturally around her child, a silhouette of patience and strength. Then her phone buzzed. She hesitated, then pulled it from the side pocket of the diaper bag. The Wi-Fi was patchy, but one message came through. It was from her best friend. "Camille, back in Oakland. Girl, are you okay? You're all over the internet. Nova, too. Someone filmed it. It's gone viral." Sloane's heart fluttered. Her thumb hovered above the reply bubble. She looked around the cabin again. She hadn't checked. She hadn't asked. She had wanted to stay present, to protect the quiet peace of these rare moments when no one was demanding she explain herself. But now that she knew, it was as if the air itself had thickened. She opened Instagram. 10 unread messages, 3 DM requests from people she didn't know, tags, mentions. Someone had already clipped the footage with captions, "Flight attendant forces black mom to check baby's bag. First-class passenger steps in. Cabin watches in silence." Sloane's hand went to Nova's back instinctively, shielding her without even thinking. Not from danger, from exposure. She hadn't chosen this, but she wasn't afraid of it either, just protective. She typed a quick response to Camille. "I'm okay. We're okay. We'll call after landing." Then she closed the app. She wouldn't read the comments. Not yet. Behind her, the woman from 22A passed her a small slip of paper folded once. Sloane turned and accepted it quietly. Inside was a short handwritten note. "You were powerful. Just thought you should know. No name. Just that." Sloane smiled faintly and tucked the note into her journal. In the cockpit, the captain gave a soft announcement about approaching Asheville and beginning descent preparations. Passengers stirred, trays clicked closed, and overhead compartments thudded shut. Dana walked the cabin slowly, checking seats. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes looked hollow. She passed Sloane without speaking, though her gaze lingered. Preston met her near the front as she returned to the galley. He didn't say anything at first. Then, gently, "Sometimes it's not about intent, it's about impact." Dana nodded, but her voice didn't come. She turned back toward the jump seat, her spine straight but her heart uneasy. As the plane tilted downward, slicing through clouds toward the Carolina hills, each passenger braced in their own way. Sloane held Nova close. Dana gripped the armrests tighter than usual, and Preston, looking out the window, wondered how many more times it would take before the world learned how to see people fully, before something this basic wouldn't need a video to be believed. As Flight 682 touched down at Asheville Regional Airport, a ripple of relief moved through the cabin. Seatbacks jolted ever so slightly as rubber met runway, and passengers instinctively braced for the deceleration. The familiar thud, the brief tilt of gravity, The soft bump as the wheels locked, it all felt normal, but nothing else was. Sloane sat still, her arms wrapped around Nova, who had slept through the landing. The child's soft breath tickled the fabric of her hoodie, and Sloane lowered her cheek to her daughter's head, grounding herself in that moment. She knew the minute her phone reconnected to solid signal, the outside world would find her. And it did. The notifications came in like a wave. Her lock screen lit up with a flood of alerts. Missed calls, messages, mentions. Camille had called 3 times. There were texts from parents of her students, old classmates, even someone she hadn't spoken to since high school who apparently had seen the video and written, "Was that you proud of you for standing your ground?" Sloane turned off the screen and let the phone fall back into the side pocket of the diaper bag. The attention felt suffocating. She didn't want to become a headline, didn't want Nova's face frozen mid-cry on people's social feeds. And yet, part of her knew she had touched a nerve far bigger than herself. What happened on that plane, what almost happened, wasn't unique. It was just finally seen. She glanced toward the front. Preston was still in his seat, back straight, eyes alert. He gave her a subtle nod, and she returned it with a tired, grateful smile. The man in 21B had already stood, pulling his bag from the overhead bin. He paused and turned to her. "I hope things go your way," he said quietly. Sloane raised her eyebrows, surprised by the softness in his voice. "Thanks," she replied. He hesitated, then added, "She shouldn't have come at you like that. It didn't sit right." Then he moved on, blending into the line of passengers queuing to exit. Behind Sloane, a buzz filled the cabin, low conversations. Whispers of, "That's her, and I saw the video too." Phones in hands, eyebrows raised. A few subtle photos snapped in her direction when they thought she wasn't looking. She didn't respond. She wouldn't give them a reaction. Meanwhile, in the galley, Donna Koenig stood behind the beverage cart, her posture composed, but her insides tangled like wire. She had heard from the captain minutes earlier that someone from Jet Pacific's PR department had requested a full incident log and time-stamped notes. "Just in case there's press waiting," he'd said gently. Dana had nodded without comment. Now she braced herself as passengers filed past her. Some didn't look at her. A few glanced and looked away quickly. 1 or 2 gave her a lingering look that said more than words ever could. Judgment. She had worn that navy blazer for 20 years, prided herself on representing the airline with poise and neutrality. She had memorized procedures, mastered conflict resolution, learned to smile through chaos. But this wasn't in any handbook. When Sloane approached the front with Nova still tucked close, Dana straightened. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Then Sloane paused. They stood face to face. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Dana's voice, when it finally emerged, was quiet, controlled, but not cold. "I'm sorry. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't perfect. But it was real." Sloane blinked. She didn't expect it. "Thank you," she said, the weight of her exhaustion breaking just slightly in her voice. Dana didn't move, didn't reach out, but her eyes followed Sloane all the way down the jet bridge until she disappeared into the terminal. And then she exhaled. Outside the gate, everything changed. A local news crew had already set up by the exit. A woman with a press badge and bright lipstick stood near the wall, scanning every face that came through. Another man held a camera, recording casually as passengers streamed past. When Sloane stepped through, It was immediate. "Excuse me, Ms. Barrett Sloane." "Barrett," the reporter asked, stepping forward gently. Sloane stiffened. "I'm sorry. I'd rather not do this right now." The reporter nodded. "Completely understand. Just so you know, your story's out there. People are listening. People care." Sloane didn't answer. She kept walking, head down, adjusting Nova's wrap-like armor. Another voice called from the side. "You handled that with so much grace. Seriously, a teenage girl, no microphone, no camera, just sincerity." Sloane paused and gave her a tired smile. "Thanks," she said. At baggage claim, Preston waited by the carousel, his carry-on in hand. He had declined the town car offered by the hospital. He wanted to walk through this with his feet on the ground. A woman approached him, black, mid-40s, stylish in a green blazer and gold hoop earrings. "You're Dr. Chase, aren't you?" she asked. Preston gave a cautious nod. She extended a hand. "My name's Clarice. I run a community initiative in Charlotte. We're working on racial equity in public-facing industries. What you did up there, that meant something." Preston accepted the handshake, surprised by the wave of emotion that came with it. "I just did what anyone should have done," he replied. Clarice smiled, eyes steady. "But not everyone does. So, thank you." He watched her walk away, her presence as calm and commanding as a closing statement in court. Nearby, Sloane sat on a bench beside her luggage, holding Nova close. She hadn't checked any bags, but she needed a moment, just to sit, to be still. A man from Jet Pacific approached her, badge visible, smile polite. "Ms. Barrett," he said, "on behalf of the airline, we'd like to offer our apologies and complimentary credits for your next flight with us." Sloane looked up at him, brow raised. "I'm not looking for flight credits," she said. The man hesitated. "Of course. I understand. If there's anything else we can do." "There is," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "Make sure the next mom who looks like me doesn't get treated like a risk." He nodded, unsure how to respond. Then Sloane stood, tightened her coat around Nova, and walked toward the exit. Behind her, the buzz of the airport resumed announcements, rolling suitcases, the rhythm of ordinary life, but the impact of what had happened still hovered in the air, and for everyone on that flight, nothing would quite feel ordinary again. The next morning, Sloane sat in her sister's guest room in Charlotte, sunlight streaming across the floral bedspread. Nova lay beside her on a patchwork quilt, gurgling contentedly as she chewed on her fingers. The baby had no idea the world had turned upside down while she slept. Sloane's phone buzzed again. She hesitated. Another notification, another missed call, another media request. She had turned off comments on all her social media platforms the night before. Camille helped her write a short post. "Thank you for your support. I'm prioritizing rest, my daughter, and peace right now." Still, people kept messaging. Some were kind, some were cruel. Most were demanding something she never offered: her voice, her explanation, her pain packaged into sound bites. She turned the phone face down and looked at Nova. "You have no idea what you walked us into, baby girl," she whispered, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. "But maybe it's better this way." Downstairs, Camille was already making tea, the kettle whistling softly. The news played low on the television. Sloane could hear snippets as she walked down the stairs. Jet Pacific has yet to issue a formal apology. though they have acknowledged an in-flight incident involving one of our passengers and a member of our crew. Dr. Preston Chase, a trauma surgeon based in Oakland, has not spoken publicly, but his name has trended on social media for 18 hours straight. Several civil rights groups are calling for a formal review of airline training procedures. Sloan sat at the kitchen table and exhaled. Camille handed her a mug and raised an eyebrow. "You ready to talk to anyone yet?" she asked gently. Sloan shook her head. "Not yet. I don't want this to become a performance." "It already has," Camille said. "The question is whether you're going to let them write your lines for you." Sloan winced. She wasn't trying to be a spokesperson. She was a mom who had tried to get from Oakland to Asheville without being humiliated. She never asked to become a headline. But something inside her whispered that silence, now, might not be enough. Meanwhile, across the country at Jet Pacific's corporate headquarters in Seattle, Dana Koenig sat outside a glass-walled conference room, hands folded in her lap. She wore the same navy blazer, though today it felt like a costume more than a uniform. HR had summoned her that morning with a vague but formal email regarding the incident on Flight 682. Inside the conference room, she could see 2 directors and a compliance officer reviewing a printed transcript of the passenger manifest. A legal consultant tapped her pen on a yellow notepad. Dana's heart beat faster. She had worked for Jet Pacific for 2 decades. She had weathered turbulence, emergency landings, mechanical failures, even a mid-air medical emergency once, but this felt different. This wasn't about what went wrong with the aircraft. This was about what went wrong with her. "Ms. Koenig," a voice called. She stood and walked into the room, spine straight, hands steady. They asked her to recount the incident. She did. They asked what her intention was in asking the passenger to gate-check her diaper bag. She told the truth. "I believed the bag violated underseat regulations. That was the only reason I engaged her." The director, a black woman named Michelle, leaned forward. "Did you consider whether enforcement of that regulation could be viewed through a biased lens, given the context, given the passenger's race, her child?" Dana's mouth went dry. I didn't think about that in the moment. Do you see it now?" Dana looked down. "Yes." Michelle let the silence stretch for a moment. "We're not here to crucify you, Dana, but we are responsible for understanding how our frontline staff engage with customers, especially when that interaction reinforces systemic harm." Dana nodded slowly. "I've been in this job a long time," she said, voice softer now. "I've always followed the rules. I thought that meant I was being fair. But maybe I was just hiding behind them." Michelle didn't smile, but she didn't look angry either. Policy isn't supposed to replace judgment. It's supposed to support it. And what you showed wasn't judgment. It was rigidity. Dana nodded again. She didn't argue. Outside the room, her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "I watched the video again. I still love you, but I hope you think about what that woman must have felt." Dana closed her eyes. Later that evening, Sloan received a call she wasn't expecting. A young assistant producer from a national morning show offered her a platform. "Just 10 minutes, she said. "We'd love to hear your experience. We believe stories like yours deserve a national audience." Sloan paused. She thought of how quickly stories like hers were spun into something else. Sympathy in the moment, then critique, then erasure. "Can I bring someone with me?" she asked. "Absolutely." She hung up and stared out the window at the quiet street outside. Nova was asleep upstairs. Camille was folding laundry in the next room, and Sloane felt something settle in her chest. Not fear, not pride, just a sense that, for once, she had control over how the story would be told. Meanwhile, in Oakland, Preston Chase sat on a bench outside his hospital's staff entrance. He hadn't spoken to any media, hadn't posted, hadn't replied to the dozens of requests from advocacy groups, podcasts, and press outlets. But he had written something, a short op-ed, just under 600 words. Not about what happened, but about what it meant. He titled it "The Seat Beside Us," and he ended it with this: "Sometimes being a bystander is a luxury. Sometimes the only moral choice is to stand up while the plane is still in the air." He didn't say Sloane's name, didn't reference the airline, but when he sent it to the Atlantic that night, he felt, for the first time, like he wasn't just reacting, he was responding. And maybe that was the difference. The studio lights were cooler than Sloane expected, not harsh, but bright enough to feel exposed. She sat upright in the chair opposite the anchor, wearing a soft gray sweater and dark slacks. Her curls were pulled back, understated earrings glinting just slightly under the lights. Nova wasn't on set, but slept nearby in Camille's arms behind the cameras. The crew had made sure of its soundproof glass, gentle music, a rocking chair in the green room. Sloane looked calm, but her palms were damp, tucked tightly into her lap. The anchor leaned in, smile reassuring. "Whenever you're ready." Sloane took a breath. "Last week, I boarded a flight with my 6-month-old daughter in a single diaper bag," she began. "I didn't expect anything unusual. I didn't expect to be told my only bag containing everything my child needs had to be checked. And I didn't expect to be questioned so sharply in front of an entire cabin." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "I also didn't expect a stranger in first class to stand up and ask a very simple question. Not just why I was being singled out, but what kind of system lets this keep happening quietly, again and again." She let the silence sit. "I'm not here to relive it. I'm here because I realized that what happened to me wasn't just about me. And it's not about one airline or one flight attendant. It's about the accumulation of 1,000 small humiliations that Black mothers, and especially Black women, experience in spaces where we are seen as a disruption before we are seen as human." The anchor nodded solemnly. Sloane continued, "I don't want pity. I don't want apologies that get buried in press releases. I want training, accountability, dignity. I want my daughter to grow up believing that her safety isn't conditional on someone else's perception of her worth." A single tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. "I spoke up that day because I had no choice. I'm speaking up today because I do." Behind the glass, Camille pressed her lips together, holding Nova a little tighter. The producer glanced at her watch. The interview would air the next morning. But already, everyone in the room knew it wouldn't just be a clip. It would be a statement. Across the country, in Oakland, Preston Chase sat in his kitchen, the morning light just beginning to stretch across his counter. His op-ed had published 3 days earlier. The Atlantic titled it exactly as he'd submitted "The Seat Beside Us." Emails poured in, some from students, some from old colleagues. One from a pastor in Atlanta who had read it aloud to his congregation. But he hadn't heard from Sloane. He didn't expect to. What he did instead was simple. He donated his speaker's fee from an upcoming hospital event to a nonprofit that trained airline employees in implicit bias and de-escalation. And he wrote one more letter, not to a publication, but to Nova. He folded it and mailed it to Camille's house, not knowing whether Sloane would read it or ever show it to her daughter. All it said was this: you were there. You mattered, and the moment made a difference because you existed in it. Never forget that. That same morning, Dana Koenig sat in the break room at Jet Pacific's Asheville office, staring at a mug of black coffee gone cold. She had taken a leave of absence, voluntary, but strongly encouraged. Her crew rotation had been paused. She'd begun the airline's restorative justice training. The first session had been humbling. She was the oldest in the room, the only one crying by the end. She hadn't tried to defend herself, just listened. And now, she found herself writing something she wasn't sure she'd send. A letter. Dear Ms. Barrett, I want to say what I didn't have the words for that day. I made you feel unsafe when you were already doing the hardest job in the world protecting your child. I thought I was protecting the cabin, following policy, but I wasn't protecting you. I didn't give you the benefit of dignity, and for that, I am deeply sorry. You didn't deserve the scrutiny. You deserved support. You reminded me of someone I love deeply, my son, Ethan, now 17. He told me, when he saw the video, that what I did looked like fear pretending to be authority. He was right. I'm working to be better, not for the cameras, not for the airline, but because silence is no longer an option for me either. With respect, Dana Koenig. She folded the letter and placed it in her bag. She didn't know where to send it yet, but writing it mattered. And maybe that was the beginning. A few weeks later, Sloane sat in the back pew of a small community church, Nova sleeping soundly in a sling on her chest. The sanctuary was quiet, midweek, the faint hum of a vacuum somewhere in a hallway the only sound. Clarice, the community leader who'd met Preston at the airport, approached her gently. We're holding a round table next month, she said. Parents, educators, flight crews, media. Not about blame, about solutions. If you ever feel like sharing, you're welcome. Sloane smiled softly. I'll think about it, she said, then added, but I'd rather listen first. Clarice nodded. That's a good start. The day after the interview aired, Jet Pacific released a public statement. This time, not a boilerplate response. They announced a review of in-flight training protocols, a new leadership position focused on passenger dignity, and a 6-month listening tour across major U.S. cities. At the end of the statement, they wrote, every passenger deserves to be seen, to be treated with dignity. We failed, and we will do better. It was imperfect, but it was something. And sometimes, the smallest acknowledgement is the beginning of real accountability. That night, Sloane sat on the porch swing outside Camille's house, Nova dozing beside her, the stars above clear and scattered. She opened her journal. February 21st. I used to think flying was about distance, how far you could go in the shortest time. But maybe it's really about what you bring with you into the sky and what you carry down again. She paused, then wrote, we carried each other, even when we didn't know it. The swing creaked gently. The wind shifted, and for the first time in a long time, Sloane didn't feel small. She felt seen. What began as a simple request to stow a baby bag ended up exposing a deeper truth about how policies are enforced. about who is seen as a threat, and about what happens when dignity is denied at 37,000 feet. Sloan Barrett didn't ask to become a symbol. Dana Koenig didn't set out to become the face of unconscious bias. And Dr. Preston Chase. He just knew silence was no longer an option. This story reminds us that every seat on a plane holds more than a passenger. It holds a person, a story, a history, and when those in power choose rules over humanity, the damage doesn't stop at landing. But here's the hope. When one person stands up, even gently, the entire cabin shifts, and maybe, just maybe, the world on the ground starts to shift too. If this story moved you, share it. If it made you think, talk about it. And if it made you feel something, don't let that feeling disappear. We have more stories coming, more voices that need to be heard. So please like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because change starts when we choose to stay awake. We'll see you on the next flight.